Good evening, this is Mr. Wintermelon. So we have come to the last theme of your O-level syllabus, which is man and his environment. A bit of sexist down there, his environment. But anyway, we are going to start off with the first chapter of the last theme, which is ecology. But first, what is ecology? So ecology is the study of the interaction between organism and its biotic and abiotic environment. What's the meaning of biotic and abiotic? So biotic is basically the interaction with other living organisms. For example, monkey eating apple from an apple tree. The monkey is interacting with the apple tree. As for abiotic, it means the interaction with the non-living environment. There are lots of factors such as light intensity, temperature, water availability, salinity, which is how salty the water is, oxygen content, and pH of soil and water. So depending on the change in the abiotic environment, it will also affect the ecosystem. So just a brief chapter overview. In this video, you will learn about food chain. In the next video, it will be the ecological pyramids. And finally, in the last video, you will learn about carbon cycle. So just some basic terminology before we proceed. Not a long one, it's just one slide. Unlike the terminology in genetic and cell division. Bleh. So first of all, we need a place for all the organisms to live. And the place is known as habitat, which is a place where organism lives. So inside the habitat, we will have different organisms. And a population is a group of organisms of the same species, such as the population of macaque in the forest. So a habitat doesn't just have one population. It also has different species. So all the species will form a community, which is all the population living and interacting in one habitat. So all the different species inside a habitat forms a community. And the habitat plus its community will form the ecosystem. So those are the terms that you should be aware of. What is the meaning of habitat? What is the meaning of population? What is the meaning of community? And what is the meaning of ecosystem? But if you ask me, the most important term to know is population, which is a group of organisms of the same species. Like, what is the population of macaque in the forest? What is the population of Zanzibar yam in the forest? What's the population of ant inside the forest? Population is the word that you must know. So for this video, like I said, we will learn about the food chain. And by the end of this lesson, you should be able to briefly describe the non-cyclic nature of energy flow. Explain the term producer, consumer, and trophic level in the context of food chain and food webs. And lastly, explain how energy losses occur along the food chain and discuss the efficiency of energy transfer between trophic level. So let us first look at the definition of a food chain. A food chain is a series of organisms through which energy is transferred in the form of food. So each level or stage of a food chain is known as a trophic level. To give an example of a simple food chain, we start off with grass, which is eaten by the deer or the gazelle, and the gazelle is eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So this is just a simple food chain. But generally, in a food chain, what we will see is a producer and one or many consumers. Producers are organisms that make their own food, through photosynthesis. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying green plant. They obtain energy by converting light energy into chemical energy, which is stored in glucose. Your consumer, on the other hand, are the animals. So consumers are organisms that are unable to make their own food and obtain energy and nutrients by feeding on other organisms. So there are two types of consumer, the herbivores and the carnivores. Of course, there are omnivores, but they kind of fall under primary and secondary depending on which food chain they are in. So herbivores are the primary consumer, meaning they are the first. Primary is the first, because herbivore will consume the producer. So producer is in the first trophic level, while herbivores or the primary consumer is in the second trophic level, while carnivores are definitely in the third or fourth trophic level because they are the secondary or tertiary consumers. Now you might ask, is there a fifth trophic level? So let us take a look at how energy flow in a food chain. So let's start off with the sun. The sun provides the light energy for the producer or the green plant. But the plant will undergo respiration and energy will be lost as a result. So the remaining energy of the plant is being transferred to the primary consumer through ingestion. Basically, the herbivore eats the plant and it can utilize the energy that is stored. Similar to the plant, the herbivore will also need to undergo respiration and whatnot, so it will lose its heat energy to the surrounding. So energy is lost to the surrounding as heat energy. And if you are a herbivore, you will probably need to answer to the call of nature. So energy will also be lost through waste. So as we move on to the next trophic level, the secondary consumer will eat the primary consumer. And similar to the herbivore, the carnivore will also loses its heat energy to the surrounding as well as taking a dump. The remaining energy of the carnivore will be transferred to the tertiary consumer, if any. And of course, the tertiary consumer will lose energy to the surrounding through heat as well as undergoing egestion. So for a food chain, it is normally less than 4 or 5 trophic level. Why is this the case? So let's just take the amount of food that the producer makes as 100%. 90% of the energy will be lost to the surrounding. So only 10% will be used for growing. And when the primary consumer consumes the plant, it is only consuming 10% of the energy which the plant makes, because only 10% is used for growing. And likewise, like I mentioned, the primary consumer will lose energy as well as egest. And only 10% of this 10% is available for the secondary consumer. And when we go to the tertiary consumer, only 10% of the 1% of the energy flows to the tertiary consumer. So why food chains are generally short is because there's very little energy left for the final consumer if it's too long. So whatever amount of energy which the producer make, only 0.1% end up for the final consumer. And this also explains why the apex predator, or the predator that is at the top of the food chain or at the end of the food chain, you can see that their population is normally very little, because you just do not have so much energy of food to support a larger population, since the amount of energy that is left for them is very little. That's why their population is not as much as, let's say, the herbivore or the grass. So most of the time, as mentioned, only 10% of the energy flows to the next trophic level. And how is the energy lost in the food chain? The most simple reason is through heat that is lost to the environment. For example, us human, our body temperature is around 36.9 degrees Celsius, which is higher than our surrounding temperature. So heat will travel from a region of higher temperature to a region of lower temperature. So heat will be lost to the surrounding. And of course, when we eat our vegetable, or let's say Kentucky Fried Chicken, we don't go and eat every parts. And same thing for animal. The predator might not eat the whole prey, and the herbivore might not eat some parts of the plant. And it can also be lost through feces, as mentioned, as waste, as well as excretory product. For example, we pee out our urine. Inside there are some trace of minerals which are lost from the food chain. And lastly, let's just briefly mention about food web. A food web is formed by a few food chain, and some animal can occupy different trophic level in a food web as a result. For example, the hawk, you can see that it can be in the third trophic level, from plant, grasshopper to hawk, or it can be in the fourth trophic level, from plant to grasshopper to spider. And it can even be in the fifth trophic level, for example, plant, grasshopper, spider, shrew, then hawk. So that's about it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we will be learning about ecological pyramids.